Blessed be everyone. Hello and welcome to episode 15. We have the great Michael Kelly from England, right?
Near Isle of Man.
Okay.
I'm in the middle of
Uh
the Irish Sea.
okay. I'm so glad we have you on. You are actually Matt Collins' teacher. And he is going to interview you guys. I'm still sick. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, whatever the doctor is doing, they didn't do it right. So unfortunately, I'm stuck with this for however long now. But Mike, why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself, and then I will hand it over to Matt, and he can ask you more questions.
Okay, well, my name is Michael Kelly. I've got quite a few years behind me now, um, and I've been interested in magic since I was in my late teens. In fact, probably before that. It's just I didn't know it was a thing before that. It was something in storybooks. Um, I spent 10 years just learning the ropes from books. I was in the Temple of Set for nearly 10 years. I've been in the Rune Guild for, oh, a couple of dozen years now. I was a
What is
magister.
the set?
The Temple of Set it is probably the leading magical organization teaching what they would term left-hand path techniques in the world. And the left-hand path, as they define it, because it's not a term I use much these days because it's got as many definitions as there are people. But they define it as being a path which seeks to develop yourself and increase your own being, as opposed to merging yourself with some greater being outside of yourself. Um, but they look at magic from a whole lot of different directions, a lot of traditions historically, um, and I'd still recommend them as one of the best places somebody could go to learn the ropes. Um, the Rune Guild, which I've been in for a couple of dozen years since, I'm a master in that focuses specifically on the runic tradition. Um, it's quite a rigorous school. It's very dedicated, and I've got nothing but good to say about that as well. So I've been lucky in my experience in a lot of ways. I haven't had too many bad experiences along the way. But since since the early 2000s, I've been taking everything that I've known. I've written a whole series of books setting up my own curriculum, which I call the Apophis curriculum, which is based around 7 stages of learning. I've written more books, both occult and fiction, than I can remember the number of, but it's certainly 60 plus. I'm also a stage magician. I do magic trickery as well as magic. And in fact, I don't see too much distinction between the two. To me, magic is a way of experiencing wonder. It's experiencing the wonder of ourselves, of the world around us, of the possibilities of everything that can be. And stage magic just takes that and turns it slightly, in that I'm giving an audience an experience of wonder. As I say, I write fiction. I use stage magic to tell stories specifically, not just isolated tricks, but everything's tied into stories. One of the wonderful things about stories is whenever someone hears a story, and it doesn't matter if the main character is anything like you, whether they're male, female, whatever, or alien, or you always see the story through your point of view, and you think, what would I do in that situation, and how would I feel if that happened? And that's why stories are so powerful. So if I can tell somebody a story, bring them into it, and then do something that seems amazing, they are amazed personally, and that is one of the most enjoyable things I do. Um, so that's the little potted history. I'm still developing what I do. You never stop learning. Um, and I suppose that's one of the things I'd say. Never trust a teacher who's telling you the same things today that he was 10 years ago. Now, it should be on the same theme. I'm not in favour of burning your bridges behind you and complete reversals, but you should develop, you keep developing, you keep learning new things. And one of the things I'm really passionate about, particularly as I've got older, when we look out into the universe, you walk outside at night and you see that starry sky above you. People react in one of two ways. You can be afraid of how immense it is, because there are phenomena going on out there in space which are so big, we can't even begin to imagine the scale. Our brains simply aren't up to it. Or you can look at that and you think, that is amazing. That is fantastic. If I keep going, if I continue, and I believe we do continue, we have, we're magicians, we have souls, we think there's more than just this one life we're living. One day, maybe, I can begin to understand that. And that's a fantastic perspective to have, I think. Um, it's a humbling perspective, and I think humility is very undervalued in magic. It's one that means that whatever problems you may have and whatever may be going on, it always shrinks it down, because the universe itself is so much bigger. And we are a part of that, and we do have a future in that.
That was
So,
really beautiful, actually. Now, what kind of stories do you like to tell? I'm really interested in this stage magic where you tell a story. What kind of stories are they made up, or are they based on facts, or based on truth, or exactly? Can you explain for our audience what kind of stories do you tell? I'm really interested in this. I love.
well,
I'll just say I love magician magic and I love real magic. I love them both.
well, I love spooky stories. So there's a lot of ghost stories and things like that in there. And I love folklore and fairy stories. So I do a lot of those as well. So the emphasis would be on whichever way the story was going. If it was a ghost story, I would make something really eerie happen. Um, and it could be more or less subtle. It could be more scary or more comedy, depending which way I want to play it. And if it's a fairy story, I give somebody an experience of a real sense of wonder, as if they've been touched by something outside themselves. Maybe, I suppose one of my favorites is an Arabian Nights style story where the person ends up getting a wish at the end. And if I've done my job as a real magician properly, not only are they getting the stage magic experience, but I've done a little ritual in that, and they're getting a real wish at the end that will give them something.
Get out.
Um,
I love that. I love ghost stories too. You could tell me many ghost stories. I just be like, really? Because I'm an avid ghost hunter, and of course you have to know the history of who's haunting the
yeah, yeah.
whatever. Um, do you have any really good ghost stories? We'll just do a ghost story and then I'll switch it over to Matt.
Um, well, I like ones which obviously which have a payoff that I can add a little magical effect to. But let's see, one of the ones which is a favorite is it's the story of a girl, a farming girl who once lived in Dartmoor, and will be haunted by that tarot card she was buried with. And before we began, somebody would have picked a tarot card and put it back in the box. This would be sealing it in the coffin. It would be put in a bag, buried in the earth, and we would then take it out, tip it out on the table, and it would be the same card that she was buried with. So they were obviously touched by the curse somehow.
What was the card?
No, that would be telling.
Oh, gotta know the secrets.
Yeah, nobody knows that until it gets tipped out. They put it in the box. The box is closed. They put the box in the bag, and then at the end they take it out. They tip the card out, and it is the same card from the story. And the cards are all different, of course.
Yeah, that's tragic and sad at the same time. I mean, talk about like, wow. Okay.
So,
that's horrible.
As for the stories, a lot of them are true stories or allegedly true, and or based on true events. One or two of them are completely made up. If I've got a good story but no facts to fit it, I'll sometimes make a story up. But most people can't tell which are which.
That's so cool. Wow. All right. Well, I'm going to hand it over to Matt now. Matt, if you want to go ahead, I actually have to get off. A cat just came in my room because my son opened the door. So I will be right back. I am so sorry.
Yeah, I've been reading The Weavers of Dreams, Otherworld Tales, Volume 1. I read the first two tales, and they're wonderful. Might you talk a little bit about that?
That's actually my most recently published book, The Weaver of Dreams. As I said, I do love fairy stories, and I wanted to write some fairy stories, and it was a bit of a new thing for me as well, because a lot of my fiction is very much pitched at adults. I wanted to write something that could be read by or for children as well. So you know, after I'd written it, I even went through and had the language adjusted to suit a younger reading age, and then went through and edited it again, so that it would be accessible by children. And I just wanted to take some of these ideas and beings and objects that often crop up in fairy tales and weave new stories around them. That's the first in what I'm seeing is a 3-volume set, and each volume will be completely differently done. The next one, I'm going to be concentrating far more on the kinds of classic patterns that we get in folk tales and fairy tales, because they're really significant. Such as there are always, say, 5 stages to a quest, or everything always happens in 3s. There's a reason there are 3 billy goats gruff. There's a reason there are 3 little pigs, that Goldilocks goes in and there are 3 bears. And each time there's a sequence in these stories that takes you from the lesser to the medium to the greater. So I want to weave the patterns like that into the stories quite deliberately. And that will be really interesting to do. And then the third one, I wanted to go a little bit more mythic and produce more stories which would be set in kind of the Arthurian themes, with some of the Knights of the Round Table or the kinds of adventures that go on in those. I mean, most people know the story of King Arthur and Merlin and so on, but when you read the source materials, there are so many other stories of other characters which just happen in a few pages, but they're not main stories. They're the ones I'm interested in. And these themes of islands which only appear in the middle of a lake at certain times of the year, and places which only appear when it's misty. These strange places and strange beings that inhabit them. So I want to go more into that as well.
Yeah, I love how there's a moral to the first two stories of that book so far. It's uh, really good. Like you were saying about being humble, it reminds me of that. Um, Speaking of the Isle of Man, though, I know you have some stories that are there, certainly.
Yeah, it's an interesting place. It's basically Celtic at its heart. I mean, it's so closely related to Ireland, and a lot of the Manx myths are very similar to the Irish ones, with the same characters, the same themes. But there's a very strong Norse element here as well. This was We have the oldest continuous parliament in the world here on the Isle of Man, over 1,000 years old. And that was set up by the Norse, who landed and decided to stay. The first Norse king of the island was Godred Crovan. He established the Kingdom of Man and the Isles, which included a lot of the Scottish islands and so on as well. And obviously, this was a wonderful base for raiding. So there was an awful lot of plundered riches brought back to the Isle of Man by Norse raiders. And one of the interesting things is we haven't a clue where most of them are, because there hasn't been that much archaeological digging gone on over here at all. So there could be all sorts of buried caches about the place. But yeah, so we have all of those things. We have some of our own creatures here as well, mythic creatures, such as the Fenodari, which was a kind of outcast fairy being. The Bagain, which was a huge shape-changing monster. And even in the names of these things, Bagain, it's similar to names like Boggart and so on from other areas. So you can see the links of how they come from the same storytelling traditions. We had our own language. It's not really used much now, but spoken, it's very similar to Irish, but it's spelled very different. You know, in Irish words, you get so many consonants which simply aren't pronounced. But these languages were written down much later. They weren't originally written languages, they were just spoken, and they were written down by monks. The monks in Ireland words that you couldn't possibly pronounce, but the monks on the Isle of Man just basically wrote it phonetically. So if we take one of the words for the fairies or the mound dwellers, the dwellers in the burial places from Irish, the she, it's spelled Sidhe. Whereas in Manx it's spelled Shee. So the spelling is different, but the pronunciation's the same.
I know Midsummer's a big holiday for some people. Might you talk a little bit about the importance of that?
Well, yeah, in recent years, I've got very much more involved in kind of the ancestral traditions, and certainly in the concept of the fae, of the fairies. Now, people will tell you they don't like that name, I'd say it's probably more accurate to say they don't like the way that name is often used, which can be derogatory. So I've got much more into that, and for Midsummer I'll generally do an alimentum, a shared meal of red wine and bread, and calling on their hosts. So that's what I did this year, and last year, and the year before. But yeah, so that's become much more a significant part of what I do. I've got very much more interested in general with the concept of ancestral spirits, of the spirits of the land around you, wherever you may be. You're standing on the earth. There are connections there to be had. There are whole generations going back before, well, long before recorded history, of people and creatures who've lived there and whose remains are still there. Their spirits can still be touched there. And this is something that's taken on a lot more significance for me.
About the dragon, I know you have a lot of dragon symbology you use.
Yeah, it's this is one of those areas where, you know, we're forever learning, and it's become, if anything, more significant over time. The idea of the dragon, and one of the people that I owe a lot to in this respect, in going back through the meanings of these things, is Robin Artisan and his books and teachings and so on. And I know he owes a lot in that to John Grigsby, who's looked a lot at what we can reconstruct and assume from the very earliest myths that we have, and the hints of such things that we have remaining in what was left by Neolithic and Paleolithic peoples, where we don't have any written record anymore, but we have images. And when you look at any of the old mythologies, nearly all of them have a primal dragon figure, and it's a female figure who creates the cosmos, the universe. She in herself is outside of space and time in a large way. She's before it and larger than it, but it's almost like she breathes it out just so she can see how it will then change and evolve. And if you look at the idea of the Big Bang, or in Norse lore, the idea of Ginnungagap, the magically charged void, where you had sparks of fire meeting river of ice and exploding and creating the whole cosmos and that. Those sparks from, let's picture the creation as the mother dragon breathing out with fiery breath, as dragons are supposed to have. Every one of us is one of the sparks of that initial flame. We're made from the same fire that burns in the heart of stars, and we all go back to that original figure. It's in us, you know, this is our heritage. It's actually in our identity. And she's figured in different ways. She's sometimes seen as a cow. And you have, certainly in Egyptian mythology, which is very old, you have images of her as a cow. And even in Sumerian mythology with Tiamat, who was seen as the dragon. She's always seen with, I'm trying to think of a word that will get past YouTube here. Let's say milk producing functions. But that's how she's pictured. So and this she's always accompanied as well by her consort, the serpent, who is dragon-like. That the serpent is maybe her son or her consort, and is kind of the active force of evolution within the cosmos as it's developing. And we can see it in everything. We can see it in that Fibonacci spiral, in the shape of so many things in nature. The shell of a snail, how it spirals outwards, the patterns within a flower, all of the proportions that these things have. We can see it in that spiraling serpentine nature of our own DNA, the things which shapes us, the spiraling of galaxies. That's at the heart of us all as well, and is I guess a more inner universe expression of the same being. Well, it's distinct too, so I generally distinguish between the dragon and the serpent these days, because they have sort of slightly different functions. And if you follow the argument of Robin Artisan and John Grigsby, you come to the point where many of these powerful pairings of gods or spirits, fairy kings and fairy queens, are kind of humanized representatives of these two forces. And but it's in us all. It is our heritage. We are very much children of the universe, and the universe itself is the child of the dragon. So that's where I am.
Yeah, you've got so many different series of books. I mean, from funny to horror to magic. You've written pretty much everything you could think of, just about. How did something like Dread Souls come about that talks about werewolves and vampires and whatnot?
Well, yeah, I mean, that book literally is half vampire stories and half werewolf stories. It's split down the middle. It was because at the time, this was the phase of twinkly, sparkly vampires, and vampires who were very human, and werewolves who were seen as beings who were cursed, tragic beings. Where I want to write a book which picked up on some of the original stories of what were supposedly actual stories of vampires and werewolves. And there are a surprising number of them on record. There's a bibliography at the back of Dread Souls which lists the reference materials I looked to, and the number of stories in those is incredible. I just picked a few of what I thought were the best ones out and then rewrote them in my style. But I wanted to put out a book that was a kind of antidote to that way of looking at them. Because the vampire, when you look at it, it wasn't just a person who was given it. I wanted to kind of set the record straight a bit, I guess, when I wrote that one.
I know you do a lot of wonderful readings. Like, I particularly liked A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens on your Library of Doom. What have you done recently, or what have you got planned for that, maybe?
Well, for quite a long time, I planned to do more readings. I love reading stories. I'm told I have a good reading voice when it's not quite as strained as it is now. I'm just getting over a little of what our poor hostess is currently suffering, and my voice is still a little bit strained at the moment. But usually, I do love reading stories, well-written stories, and I mean, A Christmas Carol is just beautifully written, and I love stories that carry emotion. Um, and this is very often why I tell them in the magic shows. I love, and I particularly love doing that to a live audience where you can see their reactions, and it's like a cycle. It's coming from me out to them, and from them into me, and by the end of it, everyone is really elevated. And I've always liked this idea that was so central to some of those storytelling cultures, like the Celts and the Norse, who'd gather around of an evening and tell each other stories and all of these old myths. To hear a story told is a tangible blessing. Doesn't matter what the story's about, but to hear a story is a blessing. And you still get an echo of that in the poetic edda at the end of the Havamal, where the speaker says, "Now are the high ones saying, said in the high ones' hall, hail the one who hears them, hail the one who speaks them, gain the one who gets them, hail those who know them." It's just confirming you've been blessed just by listening, and I really feel that. And again, sorry you didn't hear my cat. It's nearly treat time, so and she's not shy to let me know it. But one of the things after all these years doing magic is it should be something you feel, and not just what we say, we feel something, not just an emotional feeling, but something you feel in your very sensation. You can feel it, and I do feel that about stories, which is why I'm so passionate about them. But yeah, for a long time I've wanted to do more recordings for the Library of Doom. Silly name, but I love silly names too. And I will do. I just like putting them up there. And so yeah, you can look forward to more. Lots of fairy stories, lots of ghost stories, horror stories, and so on. Maybe even the odd comedy, though not all of the ones that I write are suitable for general consumption, shall I say. But yeah, I've written a lot. I do like the supernatural. I do like ghost stories. I think we're surrounded by ghosts, and I think that's wonderful. I mean, you know, people may roll their eyes at this, but the last 5 years, and I've encountered them both in dreams, and I fully accept those as genuine encounters. And I did have a genuine ghost experience back when I was in my 20s, and this is one of the reasons I said I think we're surrounded by ghosts. It was someone I knew at school, and it's not the kind of thing you'd forget. It wasn't some little fact that I'd forgotten. It's just that it hadn't risen up to consciousness, and I don't know whether the fact that I was walking along and just in a kind of trancy state anyway, you know, my thoughts were everywhere, like they often are when you're walking, whether that meant I was able to see him, or whether it was the shock of seeing him that disconnected my mind somehow, so I didn't remember he was dead to knock me out of it.
Did
But it
you
was,
see him, and like, was he like a person, or was he more like a
yeah, he was
shadow?
He was absolutely real and three-dimensional, just as if I
Like you
bumped
and
into
me.
anyone else I knew in the street, and we communicate. We said hello to each other and used each other's names. And I was speaking to the guys over here who do a lot of the local ghost investigations, and they said this is apparently a known thing. There's an alleyway in one of our towns here that's renowned for it, where people will encounter people they've known who've died, and at the moment of that encounter, they won't remember that they're dead. They'll just think they're bumping into them, and it's the most natural thing in the world. And it'll be a short while later that they'll realise, I couldn't have seen that person because they died last year. So I find that really interesting. To say, one of these days I should look into it more closely. It's having time. you know all the projects I'm juggling, Matthew. It's having time to look at things like this, but it's fascinating. I suspect it's the fact I was in a certain state of mind that let me see him and encounter him that way. And then my mind kept that knowledge at bay until it was all processed. If that's the case, what if we can replicate that state of mind? Another interesting thing is most people who encounter ghosts, famous ghosts, you're in these old houses. So you're seeing people who probably lived there a couple of 100 years ago or several 100 years ago. And they're sort of transparent, or they're grey or white. And maybe over time, some of these ghosts who used to be seen, these days they're only heard. There might be footsteps or a draft. So maybe the image of a ghost projected here fades over time, which lets you ask, if recent ghosts are like my friend when I met him, who's completely solid and three-dimensional to all appearances, maybe we're surrounded by them and we just don't know they're ghosts. Maybe some of the people you see in the street, if you're out getting groceries tomorrow or something, will actually be ghosts, but you won't know it. That's an interesting thought, isn't it?
Very interesting. I want to ask really quick, the name of your cat and how long have you had him?
She's called Daisy. We adopted her 5.5 years ago, and she's 17 now.
Oh my.
And she's still full of beans.
I do have an older cat as well. Her name is Aphrodite. My middle child, as I call her, is Morgana. She's a little bothersome, but she's all like almost piss and vinegar. I'll have to take that out. And then I have my youngest, who is a total pain in the butt, but I love her to death and I spoil her to death, and that's Maleficent. She has imprinted on me, I swear, because she follows me even into the bathroom. I'm like, go away, I'm going to the bathroom, cat.
Yeah, she's come a long way. When we first got her, she was really spiky, and she's still got a temper. I think it's just part of her personality. But you could barely touch her to begin with. But she's got really affectionate now as time's gone by. So she's a good one. She'd hate to hear me say that, but she is. So. Spoiling her street cred.
Now, is she mostly indoor, or is she outdoor and indoor, or mostly outdoor?
Well, we live in this cottage it's in the middle of farmland, so we're surrounded by fields, and we've got a large garden roundabout. So she goes out in that. She's never actually left the garden. It's big enough for her. And these days she'll just go out and sit on the path on a sunny day for few minutes and then come back in. But so she's getting older. She's not quite got the spring in her step she once had. We had to get a set of steps for her so she can get up onto the bed now. But she's still full of beans. Having said that, I haven't got the spring in my step that I used to have. So,
I mean, who does anymore? Now you were saying about, ghosts and you can see them. I mostly hear them. I'm trying to get to where I can see them. Is there a way that you were able to, I mean, obviously you just saw this person in passing, but is there a method that you know of that could get you to, exercise that muscle? As I was told, our abilities are all muscles, and you have to, like a guy going to a gym, you have to, like a wrestler going to a gym, you have to, work that muscle. Is there a
yeah,
way that we could make that muscle better?
I think to actually see them like that one, I say that one was not intended, it happened. But I was in the right frame of mind for it to happen. So I think one thing is being open in the right way, and that's something that would have to be sort of played with and trained, I guess. But I would say the main muscle, here she comes again, the main muscle you would want to have would be a good visual imagination. If you're the kind of person who can read a novel and picture everything in your head, you're training those muscles that let you see things without them being physically present. That I'd say would be the main muscle to train. After that, it's finding out what that precise semi-trance state is. And I mean, light trance is a wonderful thing. It's easy to get into. I mean, people who are watching this on a screen, they'll be in a light trance state, because anything that fixates the attention and makes the vision sort of tunnel in, you're going into a trance state. We're also in it when we read a novel. We're in it when we watch television. Anytime something fixates your attention. So, as I say, I suspect the reason that happened to me was because I've always had that good visual imagination. I've always been a strong reader. And although I hadn't finished or published anything, I was writing fiction back then in little ways. And it's the fact I was walking along, it was lunchtime, I had nothing much on my mind, so I'd have been kind of daydreaming as I was walking along, which made me open enough for it to happen. And it's amazing the things that people can see, I'm going back to stage magic here, but it can be a really useful thing in real magic too. There are exercises that use it. If you get the lighting right, so that it's dim, and people have to sort of strain their eyes a little to see details. And you're talking, let's say I was telling you a werewolf story, and the lights were dim, and I was in full flow, and my voice was perfect, and I was describing what was happening and how a transformation occurs. If the light's dim enough and I do it at the right time, this strange thing happens where our eyes will start to shift to try to focus in more so we can see more clearly. And after a while, because they're straining, they are getting tired, they'll start doing it independently. And so the features of somebody's face will begin to shift and change. And if you can see when somebody's eyes are starting to strain a bit and start telling them about a physical transformation, how somebody's nose lengthens and becomes a muzzle, they can start seeing it happen. And it's pure optical illusion, but it can affect you like that. And I'm sure it can affect us in other ways too. When our minds are in that sort of trance state, we open ourselves up to see things which aren't necessarily physically there. Doesn't mean they're not there, just they're not visible in ordinary ways, and we have to open ourselves to be able to see it. So I've learned a lot of real things through learning trickery, and you begin to say, yeah, this is a trick, but it can actually explain something that's very real.
I know you're big on dreams. Might you talk about the importance of dreams to you?
Yeah. Dreams. Well, you want to be able to use your dreams because you spend a lot of your life doing it. And truthfully, we're always dreaming. We're dreaming when we're awake. And I've talked about daydreaming. That's what happens when you stop focusing on what's outside yourself and the dreams are rising up from that deep level. They're usually below the threshold of everyday consciousness because we're too busy concentrating on other things. It keeps them below awareness, but they're always there. And I've had really strange things happen in dreams. I've had encounters in dreams with people. I've already mentioned 2 deceased friends. I mean, they were absolutely themselves. They weren't my representations of them. They were absolutely themselves. One of the things, if you meet somebody you know in a dream, very often they'll look slightly different or they'll act slightly different. These weren't. These were themselves. But I've met people who I know or have known, and there have been significant things there which have sort of cross-connected later. And there have been some really striking things too. One of the things that I love in my magic practices are magic squares. Like the ones in the Book of Abramelin. And when I was in my 20s, I did an awful lot of work with those. I found them really effective. And that might be, again, because I'm a storyteller. I like words, so I like the interplay of letters and words when they're arranged in a square. It just appeals to my way of thinking. But I know you already know this story, Matthew. It was just a couple of years ago. I had an abscessed tooth, and it was a Friday night, so the earliest I could see a dentist or phone a dentist would be the Monday. So I was going to be stuck with this thing and just painkillers over the whole weekend. It was bad the next day. My jaw was swollen out here. And I went to bed that night and I just slept in fits and starts because it was that painful. But I woke up in the morning with words in my head and the memory of a dream. And a woman came to me in this dream, and she was sitting below a willow tree on the bank of a river and talking to me. And she was dressed kind of like a fashionable woman from the 1920s with that bobbed haircut and so on. She told me her name was Shistarala. A lot of syllables, but I remembered it clearly as I woke. And she gave me a magic square with the letters of her name crossing this way and that, and forming other little squares with patterns of letters in them. And this was a 9x9 square, so it wasn't a small one, which would cure toothache. So I sat up, I pulled my dream journal over, I scribbled it out, and by the time I'd finished drawing it, the pain had gone and the swelling went down. it had completely gone back to normal by the Sunday. So I've had things. It's not the only magic square I've received in a dream. The other one was not quite so immediate an issue, but it was still an interesting square. But yeah, dreams really can be places where we reach that other side, the invisible world, the dream world, the unseen world, whatever you want to call it. Because that's where, to my thinking, that's where the largest part of us always is anyway. Um, when I think of us as everyday people, um, we're like mushrooms. We're like the mushroom that pushes above the surface, whereas the real self is the huge fungus which might spread out for miles under the surface of the ground. We're a far, far larger thing than just this little bit that we push forward into this world. And people ask, where do you go when you die? You don't go anywhere, you're already there. Most of you is already there. This bit just shrivels up and goes back. Um, so that's my perspective on how the worlds interrelate anyway. And there are times you can really feel that deeper part of you. And
Well, Mike, I hate to cut this short, but I do have to go put my son to bed. But it has been so wonderful talking to you. I mean, it's been almost an hour. I mean, the time just flew right by. So we definitely
yeah,
have to have you back on to explain more about your books. And I know Matt would love this because you are his teacher. So, um, but I'd like to thank everyone for coming. Everything for Mike will be in the description field. If you'd like to check him out. Again, just click the links. We have our links. I have my teacher's links, Matt's links. I have all kinds of links. Just follow us and click on those links and follow us all. So, Matt, who do we have next week?
Next week, we've got Carly Stunick of Emerson Sinclair Band.
Grand, great, great, great. Well, that's it for us. I'm so sorry that I have to cut this short, Mike. It has been so wonderful talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on. And again, everything will be in the description field. And blessed be everybody. Have a great week.